Hi, Martin Purnell here. As our regular listeners may be aware, I try to take the school holidays as a time away from recordings. However, for this Easter period, I really felt we should have two special podcasts available. This week's episode is a repeat from last year's Easter podcast with Preston Sharpe, and wow, it is well worth listening to again. April 10th's release is a mini podcast with returning guest, author and Baptist minister Jeannie Kendall, as we reflect as to what Easter means by way of Psalm 23 and all the imagery the verses contain. A brand new full-length podcast will be available from the 17th of April. Meanwhile, here's the episode from last year with Preston Sharpe.
Hi, my name is Martin Purnell, and welcome to Off-Grid Christianity, a weekly podcast for those who go or don't go to church and where we can meet and hear from those that have made their faith count. This podcast series is to encourage via conversation and not necessarily change your mind prior to listening. You can contact us as well by email, ogc@accessradio.biz, ogc@accessradio.biz, and biz is spelled B-I-Z. So please enjoy today's guest, who is the founder and curator of the Art of Preaching website, which you'll find on Substack, and the Resurrection People podcast. Our guest wants to help folk who are preparing their Sunday sermons by hearing and understanding the meanings behind the chosen scriptures. Our guest is a happily married man and with a family, and originally from Tulsa in Oklahoma, but now lives in Tennessee, where he is the rector at Sacrament Church, Nashville, having studied at Oral Roberts University and also contemporary worship and the arts at Friends University, which is in Wichita. We used to say Wichita over here, but maybe it's Wichita. I don't know. We'll find out. In Kansas. What does he think of 45 to 60-minute sermons when they could, well, at least some of them, be said in 5 minutes or even less? What should a classic sermon have, and what should it avoid? With church growth generally on a serious decline in the Western world, what should churches do? And finally, and obviously asking for a friend, was he born in Tulsa or 24 hours from Tulsa? And when he was at Wichita, did he meet a lineman? All these questions, we'll have to find out the answers. It gives me great pleasure to welcome today to Preston Sharpe. Preston, thank you so much for joining us. So, obviously, let's get it out of the way first of all. Is it Wichita or Wichita? How do you say it?
I say Wichita. Yeah, that's typically how we say it. Now, it's unfortunate that my ear, in such a way to your accent, it sounded like you said the same word twice. So Wichita is what we would say.
It is Wichita. That's how I always used to say it because of a certain song, obviously. Wichita lineman, I think Glenn Campbell said, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And 24 hours from Tulsa or born in Tulsa? Where were you exactly in Tulsa, sir?
I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah, was born and raised there and lived my first 30 years of life in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
What do people get called if they're from Tulsa then?
Tulsans. Yeah, and it's starting to get cool to be from Tulsa. It wasn't that way when I lived there, but it's growing a lot. They have a lot of cultural stuff happening. There's a new Bob Dylan museum that's opening up there where all of his history and artifacts are going to be. So there's a Woody Guthrie kind of place there. I mean, it's a happening place now.
You didn't say Bob. I thought that's how every American called Bob Dylan, Bob Dylan sort of thing. Why is Bob Dylan having a museum such then in Tulsa?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess he has ties. I think it's through Woody Guthrie and his history there in Oklahoma. And then their connection. The new movie kind of points to that a little bit. I don't know if anybody's seen that. But then I guess they were looking for a place. And I think when you put in a museum, you don't want to put it in New York or something like that because they already got tons of stuff. So find a town that can kind of claim it as its own. Tulsa's right in the middle of the country, lots of country western music, and it was a good place.
Well, that does sort of make sense. I haven't seen the film yet, but I'm hearing rave reviews.
Yeah, it's quite good.
I should look forward to that. I could wax lyrical with you about music, as you can probably tell.
Well, I live in Nashville, so I'm used to it.
Yeah, we'll talk about it as well, no doubt. Got so many questions to ask you, but before we do, Preston, let's go with the 5 interest-getter questions so we can get a bit more of an understanding who you are. So question 1 then, if you could invite anybody from history for an evening meal, alive or dead, so that you could ask them questions, Preston, who would it be?
I'd like to ask Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. about his view of our world right now and perspective on all the different issues and how we can seek to be faithful in this time. So that's the first person that would come to mind for me.
That'd be very, very good. And of course, last week it was announced by your new president that the Martin Luther King files are going to be opened up. And from what I can gather, because I like listening to these sort of things, there's a lot of stuff that hasn't been touched before. Whereas with the JFK files, which is one of my favourite topics of all time, there's still a lot to come out there, but the Martin Luther King ones in particular should be fascinating. Excellent. Right, question 2 then. Who is your favourite biblical character or favourite biblical story or favourite parable, please, Preston?
I'm going to go with my story on this one. So I love, and maybe a lot of people say this, I don't know, but my favorite is this journey of these 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus in Luke 24.
Yes.
And it's just this beautiful story of these unnamed disciples. We're just not told who they are, leaving Jerusalem. That we get the sense that they're discouraged or confused about the crucifixion and then also the missing body, and just the resurrected Christ appearing to them on the road and having a conversation with them without being recognized. And then it says he tells them the story of Moses and the prophets, tells them the story all the way through, and basically in light of him and his resurrection. So many things I love about that. I love that he meets them on the road as they're walking away from the holy place. I love that he's revealed to them in the meal. I love that he interprets the story. Anyway, I'm answering your question way more than probably you asked, but that's my favorite story.
No, that's great. In fact, I'd just like to develop a bit more if that's okay, in light of someone sharing this from a theological point of view. She was saying that she thought that the couple walking along could well have been man and wife, or husband and wife. What do you think?
Oh, I think it's possible for sure. It doesn't tell us specifically, but I like that imagery because it, in some sense, can be a bookend of Adam and Eve, on the other side, that we have creation and new creation. It also could be Mary and Joseph. So if you think about this, not that it is Mary and Joseph, you know what I'm saying? It's an image of that. So if you have early on in Luke's gospel, you have Mary and Joseph leaving Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Thinking that they've lost 12-year-old Jesus. And then at the end of Luke's gospel, you have a couple leaving Jerusalem thinking that they've lost Jesus. So there's this really amazing parallel there and yet in both cases, Christ appears to them and reminds them of the story, reminds them of who they are, and reminds them of all that needed to happen. I think if Luke is doing that, it's beautiful. It's brilliant. Of course, I believe it really happened, but that literary book ending is just really beautiful.
That is really, really good.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you take the book of Revelation, there's so many bookends of Revelation to go back to Genesis as well. So why not have that as a bookend as well? Fantastic.
For sure.
Great stuff. Question 3. This could be very interesting. Now, you can either be Prime Minister of the UK, Preston, or you can be President of the USA. So what are you going to go for? Are you going to be a president or are you going to be Prime Minister?
So yes, depending on how I answer this could be a very fraught question to answer. I'm going to go ahead and keep this pretty superficial today and say, if I was the president of the United States, I would do away with daylight savings time.
Oh.
Do you all have daylight savings time in?
Oh, we do.
You do. Okay. So here it causes all kinds of weirdness for us. I live in Nashville, which is in the middle of the country, but it's on the eastern side of the middle of the country. So we're in this time zone that's central time zone, but it always gets darker here in the winter than it does in a lot of other parts of central time zone because we're on the eastern side. So it just gets really dark a lot here in Nashville. Well, then when you add daylight savings times, it just gets worse. So I would like to just do away with that. Again, I know there's some farmers that would have some things to say about that. I'm sure there's reason for it, but that would be my choice, is do away with daylight savings time.
You can blame us across the pond for daylight saving time.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Is it good for y'all?
Well, I believe it comes from the First World War.
Okay.
Obviously, with more and more men going out to the trenches, something had to be done to improve product revenue, to get more and more bullets made, everything, that sort of stuff, plus the farmers. So it came in as a result of the First World War. That's what I'm led to believe anyway.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
But it is a pain, you're right.
Well, and depending on, as a pastor, it's always interesting too, because for years, it was kind of ingrained in us as pastors to go, you got to remind people about daylight savings time. So make sure that they arrive at church on time and all that kind of stuff. And now they all everybody gets their alarm on their phones. So it's not like they got to set clocks back or anything like that. So it just happens and we're all sleepy one time and then we get an extra hour of sleep another time.
Which is lovely, of course.
Yes.
Question 4. Outside of family events, Preston, what has been your most enjoyable day out so far, please?
It was tough to eliminate family events fully from this. I'm a big fan of a basketball team here, and I know folks across the pond may not be into the NBA, but we have the National Basketball Association here, and I'm a big fan of the Indiana Pacers. And it's a basketball team. My dad's from Indiana. I've rooted for them forever. And we had an opportunity to go to a great game with my brother and my dad. Again, that's where it breaks the rules. It's family events a little bit. We got to go, had a wonderful dinner. We drove together, spent great time together. And when I have the opportunity to do that, I'm kind of a geek about basketball. So it was really fun.
Well, there was somebody I know vaguely, and she's from Indiana, and she loves Motown and soul music and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So when she said, "Oh, well, I'm from Indiana," I then said, "Oh, well, I'm from Indiana, but I can't go back there," thinking she's bound to know the song "Indiana Wants Me." But no, that went straight over.
Man, you got the song references. I love it. All over the place.
Told you. Had a wasted life.
No, it's good.
What a song that is, Ardeen Taylor. His claim to fame, by the way, and I will move back into proper reasons for why with this podcast. His claim to fame, Ardeen Taylor, because he was one of the songwriting teams within Tamla Motown, or Motown as you want to call it. But he was white, and he was the first person to ever have a single released on the Motown label as a white guy. There you go.
Wow.
Ardeen Taylor, Indiana Wants Me.
Quite a thing.
Yeah. What a track.
That's awesome.
I have to go and play again. Anyway, question 5. Meanwhile, back in reality. Question 5. What has been your most embarrassing moment, please?
Yeah. So I have to have 2 that I have to mention, and they both are related to music. So nice connection to what you have said. So I've done a lot of speaking over my life. I've done a lot of preaching. That part, I've never really had a time I've gotten up publicly and just really bombed in talking, right? Like that's not really been an issue. But I used to do a lot of singing too when I was younger. And there's been a couple times that were just terrible with my singing. So the first one was, and this one wasn't performance, but I remember being in a youth group, a kids' youth group, and I had just started singing in the choir, and I just started, getting involved in all of that and was really enjoying it. But I was the youngest kid in the youth group. I think it was 12 or 13 years old. And it was a really big youth group, kind of a massive thing. And one day they were up there singing and doing the worship set. And then she did this odd hand motion. Well, you podcasters can't see that, but she's moving her hand forward, kind of like a come here kind of thing. And it looked like she was pointing and doing that. So it looked like she was pointing at me, and I'm sitting on the front row. So I just kind of started walking up to her. I'm a 12, 13-year-old right in the middle of the worship set, thinking she wants me to sing or she wants me to participate in this. And all of a sudden I get so close, she opens her eyes and she goes, no. And so I'm like, oh. So I went back. Turns out she's just doing a hand motion, like a, kind of a worship. She's in the middle of her singing and stuff. And so I was mortified. I mean, there's all these older kids. It's this giant youth group. It's this big thing. So that's something that held on to me. And then as I got a little bit older, we were in a different church, and my dad was the pastor. And he would every once in a while find songs that he liked and ask me to sing them. And he had assigned me this song by a guy named Larnell Harris, I Miss My Time With You. And it was about prayer. And I remember practicing it, and it's an odd key and it's an odd song, and it jumps back and forth between octaves. That time I was probably 16, 17 years old. And I got up on Sunday morning and I could not find the note for the life of me. And so I sang through the whole thing just completely off key and out of tune. And I remember that moment being so embarrassing. Anyway, I look back on both of those, and I'm thankful for my identity is not found in those things, but in Christ. Move on.
And of course, after the event, you go up to the band and say, why were you guys all out of tune? I was fine. It was you guys.
Perfect.
Get your instruments sorted next time.
Yes, exactly.
Well, you mentioned that your dad was a pastor, but why did you actually want to go to university to study theology and become a pastor yourself? Tell me more, please.
I wish I could say it was a detailed time of discernment where I was figuring out all of my different options and laying down them all in front of me. But honestly, since I was 5 years old, I felt a very strong calling towards the ministry, pastoral ministry. I mean, it was a really clear thing at 5, and then it never really waned. Now, the interesting thing was, yes, my dad is a pastor. My parents are both pastors, but they're also marriage and family therapists, and they're in private practice for counseling.
Oh, wow.
And that's really been always their kind of primary thing. But when he was the pastor, I always sensed my dad, he was a reluctant pastor. He kind of pulled into it. He was preferred to pastor with other people. He didn't ever want to be the front leader or anything like that. And then even did not encourage me to go into it because he knew a lot of the pain and struggle that went along with pastoral ministry. But I think it was actually that environment of such grace and compassion and just genuineness that allowed me to step into that. I also grew up in a church that I had a senior pastor when I was really young who was really encouraging of me. I won't go into lots of detail on this, but I grew up in a church that was multi-ethnic, and the senior pastor was African-American. That was very unique in our part of the world, where in Tulsa, where I lived. And so it was a really diverse, environment. And he was just very encouraging of me and, supportive of me. So all those things together, I just continued. I just didn't really ever have anything else that I was excited about. This was always the direction that I wanted to go in, and ended up pursuing it.
That's very interesting, because on these podcasts, we often hear of guests saying, well, I've always had this burning ambition. Well, if it's from God, then go for it.
Yes, right.
But then other people will just hide it under a bushel, I suppose. We're going to use a scriptural version. Very quickly then, for those that are listening today and are at the crossroads, and I know there are people, because of the conversations I've had, who have got maybe a really successful job, they know they're doing well, but there's this burning desire inside them to think, well, actually, maybe I should be doing this or something like that. What would you say to them?
The first thing that I just encourage people in is, often we're told this myth, I think culturally, that we do have to have it all kind of figured out. There's one thing for everybody. That one thing is the thing that you have to do. Sometimes it works out that way. I just told you that I've been, moving in a particular direction, but even my pastoral ministry has looked way different than I ever expected it to. The definition of I had of a pastor when I was a little kid is quite different from what I have today. So what I think is the first step is just one foot in front of the other. It's like, okay, what is the next step that's in front of me? What are the things that cause me interest? They cause me to come alive. What are the questions I ask about life? Who are the people that I am enjoying connecting with? And then really when you take that next step, I think it's only then that the path kind of starts to show itself. But it's okay to not have it figured out. Yeah. It's okay to not know where all of that is. And some of it is experiment too. It's just, hey, I tried this and I didn't like it. And I'm not going to beat myself up that I didn't like it. I just didn't like it. And now I'm going to try something else. So some of it's trial and error, but one foot in front of the other is what I encourage people.
I've just got a feeling here that this podcast is going to go completely differently to the way that I thought it was.
Okay. All right. I'm up for it.
Oh, good. Well, bear with me on this one then, please, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I want to talk about your Resurrection podcast, and also your being the creator and founder of the Art of Preaching website. I think it's only fair we talk about that.
Yeah.
But
sure.
I think I'd love to make this actually my Easter podcast, if that's okay.
Oh, nice. Lovely.
So that we can talk about what resurrection actually means to you, because, hey, the clue is in the title, and I know you're writing a book as well. Yeah. The Resurrection podcast. Yeah. So that's what we're going to aim for. But very quickly, just tell me a bit about, please, the Art of Preaching website and why you feel you should be helping and guiding all those other people that are preaching around the world to join you on your website.
As I started pastoring, one of the things that I caught on to, and we could go more into my background if you want, but basically I came out of the charismatic Pentecostal tradition. Preaching was a very particular kind of thing in that tradition. And it was, very exciting, very passionate. And then as I got older, I started connecting with more ancient traditions, more historical backgrounds. And so I started integrating the different streams of Christian tradition. Liturgy became more important to me. The sacraments became more central to my faith. And as I explored that, part of that was I began preaching the lectionary, which as a former charismatic preacher, that's really challenging, because we were kind of taught that whatever scripture we're passionate about, that's what we should preach about, whatever we have on our heart, which can be great. That can be wonderful. But the lectionary is this like calendar of readings that the church has followed, where every week the readings are assigned to you. We have seasons and we have patterns. And there's an Old Testament and a New Testament and a gospel reading. And every 3 years, you get those same readings kind of over and over again. And the cool thing about that is you get the broad swath of the biblical narrative. So rather than just your favorite few verses that you preach all the time, you really have to preach from Ezekiel and from Ecclesiastes and these kind of things, but it broadens it and it really helps you in some way. So I started doing that years ago, even before. I'm in the Anglican tradition now. And even before I stepped into that tradition, I started preaching the lectionary. And so I had a number of cycles kind of under my belt of notes that I'd done. But I had really done a lot of study as a charismatic preacher. I had done a lot of study in the evangelical world. And so I would write lots and lots of notes. Often, most of them I wouldn't use for a sermon on Sunday morning just because of time restraints. But I'd have lots and lots of research and notes and all these kind of things. So 2021, my wife encouraged me. One of the things that had begun happening is a few people from other traditions had reached out to me and said, can we start meeting and talking through the lectionary readings each week? They wanted to know more about the seasons of the calendar, like Lent and Easter and Pentecost and Advent and all these kind of things. And then they wanted to know more how you preach about this. So I started having a meeting with pastors from Baptist churches, Methodist churches, Presbyterian, non-denominational, charismatic, all these backgrounds, and we'd walk through these readings together. So my wife finally said, you need to make this a more official thing. You need to make this more formal and let people know about it and invite as many people, as want to be involved. So I started putting together notes for the lectionary readings every week. So I'd put together about 13 pages of notes on each week. And then I do a shorter version as well. That's like 4 to 5 pages. That's more of a summary. And then I do a 1-page version. That's kind of like here's a theme for this whole week. So the website is designed to where it's a subscription service for those that want to do what we call the deep dive. Every single week, you get 13 to 15 pages on those week's readings. Again, it's not designed to write your sermon for you. It's just designed to give you some background.
Yeah.
Or the shorter version, or then the one is free. The 1 page is just, I send it out to everybody. It kind of helps you get started and ignite those things. I'd also been doing some research for other pastors. There's a company out of Austin, Texas called Docent Research Group that I've worked with for years. And they kind of do research for pastors on whatever that pastor wants. And so I've been doing that for a number of years on the side. And that had helped inform all of this stuff too. And so it's been really neat to connect with people of all different traditions and be able to do this. Now, you mentioned the podcast.
Yeah.
For a while, I was trying to be ambitious. And I was trying to do the summary 3 times a week. I was trying to go in and record a little short section of the podcast. And then I had, a baby and life got really busy.
Well, you personally had a baby. Now that really isn't really.
No, I did not. Yes, I should clarify that. A daughter was born, yes. And so I'm actually not keeping up with the podcast currently. But the website is every week, those notes go up.
That is great. And you mentioned Austin in Texas, and we had a couple of weeks ago another guest from Austin, Texas, Christian Kreider, who runs a brewery as well and is also a pastor. So
nice.
You never know.
Oh, lovely. I love that.
Bless him. He wanted to send me over some beer. Yeah. And then he realized, having worked out how much the tax would be and all the shipping and everything else like that, and he very kindly said, it'd be cheaper to fly you back over here.
That makes sense.
But that's a phenomenal podcast as well. Christian Kreider. If you haven't heard that one, have a listen. Let's delve in, please, if that's okay now, to the fact it is now Easter, or leading up to Easter. People say, you shouldn't take it literally. Let's go for it. Let's unpack it all. So the resurrection for you and for Christians around the world, how literally should we take it? What would you want to share?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges in some of the more difficult doctrines of the Christian faith, historic doctrines, is when we take them in isolation from one another. So when we kind of pull out a doctrine, so let's talk for a second about the virgin birth or the virgin conception. A lot of times the challenge that people have with it is they take it out of the creed, the Apostles' Creed or whatever, and they say, this is the bit that I have challenges with. This is the one part that I just can't believe in it. But you actually have to take it as a story, and you have to see the whole story together. So the virgin birth, for example, if you look at the story of the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, you'll see all throughout it are stories of miraculous births. I mean, all throughout the Old Testament, there are all these stories of people who come to the end of themselves and they can't carry on God's promise. And then God steps in. That's over and over again. So it's in that context that we see this story of the virgin birth, that we see this story of all these miraculous births. God steps in, fulfills his promises, even when human beings can't do that. The resurrection, I think, is similar. It's this idea of the God who is the God who's created things, the God who upends things, the God who does new things, who takes broken things and heals them, who takes things that are without life and breathes life into them. And then we have, of course, the resurrection makes sense in that context. Now, in the first century, what's interesting about it is nobody really had that in mind. there was some belief that a future resurrection would happen for all people, that all people would be raised from the dead. And we still affirm that as the Christian church, that future resurrection. But what they didn't recognize, and what was surprising, was that there would be one person, the Messiah of Israel, who would be raised from the dead before everybody else, that was there in the middle of history. But it opens up all kinds of implications for us, because you can't disconnect the resurrection from his life and suffering and death. I mean, the reality of the incarnation is God giving God's self for the world. And so when Christ comes in and he suffers and he walks the journey to the cross and he dies, then we see that in the midst of that there is something that happens, something that really beautiful and amazing that happens, this new creation which emerges. It's really tough when we start with, and I know you have a lot of folks on your podcast who are on the margins of faith. So much of my ministry has been with folks who are on the margins of faith, wrestling and struggling with, what do I have to believe? What should I believe? Can I still believe this? And so I think starting with this idea of, do I think it's literal or not, may not be super helpful. Now, I do believe that it is literal. I think it is physical, all those things. But I don't know that I would start with that binary to start with. I would start with, what is this story that I'm captivated by? And how might it change if it's real? Like, what might that actually mean if it actually happened, if it's really real? And then lean into that. And I just encourage people to protect themselves from, sometimes when you believed in something and then you feel like you don't anymore, or you're not sure if you believe something, there can be a sense of shame that comes along with that, and guilt of like, why can't I just figure this out? And I just would encourage people, like with the story of Jesus, lean into the story, listen, live into it, and then begin to ask those questions. What would it mean if it was really true? Does that what I'm saying make sense?
It does. All this came about as well, if people would like to listen to a previous podcast with Paul Golf, who goes around speaking at international conferences now. He was sharing, so I'd love to hear what you think on this, that part of the problem he thinks about maybe the church, and I'm paraphrasing a lot here, that the church seems to be in serious decline in the Western world.
Yes.
We often hear about people say, you've got to go out and preach the gospel. You've got to tell about people how they should be saved. And what Paul was saying, he was turning it around and saying, well, actually, we should maybe focus more on the resurrection, because without the resurrection, the physical resurrection of Jesus obviously dying and then all of a sudden appearing to hundreds of people at a time, the rest is meaningless, because otherwise you're just worshiping a bloke. But Jesus is more than that. Right. In light of that, what do you think?
I think it's true. I think one of the things that this changes for us, because so much of this book that I'm writing, the book is called Resurrection People. And so much of this book that I'm writing is unpacking some of the implications of, okay, if we believe in resurrection. I've mentioned before that there's a lot of books out there that try to create an apologetic for the resurrection. So they'll say, here's why, here's the historical evidence. All those things are great. They're all fine. But this book focuses on some of the lectionary readings, and it's a question of, okay, if we believe this, how does it change us? How do we become a people of the resurrection? John Paul II was famous for his phrase that he said, we're an Easter people and Alleluia is our song. And that's the idea of Christians, is we're an Easter people, a resurrection people. I think one of the things that changes for us, there's many things, but one of the things is the fear of death. So much of the fears that we experience in our lives, psychologists would tell us that the greatest of all those fears is the fear of dying. Mm-hmm. I mean, the reason why we get anxious as we age is because we know that, okay, someday we're going to die. The reason why we get worried in scarcity, when we don't have enough, is we're wondering, will I have enough to actually sustain or make it through? The reason why we have fear of being insignificant or people not liking us is because we think, well, is my life going to count for something? Is it meaningful? Well, what the resurrection does is it takes, as the Apostle Paul would say, that it takes the sting out of death. It says, yes, we are all going to go through death, but that's not the end of the story. There is something on the other side of death. And I think that is so critical and so important, because when we can remind ourselves of that yes, death is happening. We are headed in that way, but it's not going to be the end of the story. It doesn't have the final word. There is a future resurrection promised in Christ's resurrection. I think it changes how we view our entire life and how we're shaped as people.
If you had to speak to the whole wide world and his dog, but you're only given 5 minutes airtime and your chosen subject given to you was talk about the resurrection, what would you want to say in those 5 minutes about the resurrection?
I'd say a few things. The first thing is just, it is central to the life of Jesus is the resurrection. It means that the world has changed. It means that the world is a different place than it was before. One of the beauties of resurrection is understanding that all of those things that we look at the world now, and it looks like those things rule the day, whether it's violence or poverty or sickness or illness, violence, war, all of these things, we look at those and we go, okay, this isn't the end of the story. That there is a God who stepped into our world, who has taken on those things in solidarity with us, and that piece is so important, has suffered death, has suffered this experience that we will all experience, and then has brought about this new creation, this new resurrection. If we're shaped by that, I think it changes our view of other people. We can live our lives a lot more open-handedly than we would before, because we can go, God is at work. God is making things new. We can trust in him, so we can be a more generous people. We're more open to surprise. So we can go, God is the one who's brought about resurrection, so he's going to surprise us at every turn. And so we can be open to surprise and not be anxious or worried about surprise. We can understand that God is near to us and close to us, and that he has taken on these things for us and has rescued us from that. Again, I think a lot of the central word in this is trust. It's trusting that God is at work even when I don't fully see him. The other element that I think is just so critical is we can start, if we think of resurrection as a kind of freedom, that we've been set free from the sting of death, that we know that death does not have the final word, then we might be looking in our lives towards those who are like bound up by a variety of different things, whether it's shame or guilt, or they're carrying something, a habit or a pattern that is just really holding them back from being who they're fully created to be. Living as a resurrection people is asking, in what ways might I be part of their liberation and their freedom? Now that gets really challenging at times, because the goal is not, as your friend said, is not to go and preach to them. It's not to go stand on a street corner with a sign and say, hey, you're liberated, because people are not necessarily responding to that. Yeah. But what are the ways that we can live that out, and that kind of freedom and that open-handedness with others?
The fact that you've got this fantastic website to help people get more out of the lectionary so that when they're preaching, they can just add more value. The fact that you'd like to think that the preachers and the pastors that are contacting you at least once a year have got a basic understanding of which part of the Bible to discuss the resurrection from. I wouldn't mind betting that you've had feedback where people said, I've just read what you've written about the resurrection. I never thought of it like that. So what has blown people's minds? And then you can tell me what has blown your particular mind on your research on the resurrection.
Yeah. I would say that the first thing, and maybe this is an answer to both, but one of the things that a lot of people don't think about, and we can go deeply in this, and I'm pretty dependent here on the works of N.T. Wright. Many of your scholars, or many of the folks that you listen to this, have heard of the scholar N.T. Wright before. Some haven't, and that's totally fine too. Much of the view of the resurrection that I think is challenging for people to get is, where is life headed? Where's it all going? I was taught growing up that the goal of life was to get yourself to say the sinner's prayer, and then your soul will eventually go to heaven. And the natural implications of that is, okay, then the physical world doesn't really matter. Physical things don't really matter. So we can kind of cast that aside because we're wanting to transcend that, and we're going to, go to heaven one day. But N.T. Wright does a really great job, and I've come to believe this, and it is the historic Christian confession, that our hope is not in escaping and going somewhere else someday. Our hope is in the world restored, the world made right, including the physical world restored. And so resurrection is so important that it's a deeply physical thing. In fact, if you look at a lot of the accounts of the resurrection, so much of them are really physical. You've got Jesus with scars on his hands after he's resurrected from the dead. You've got him eating fish after he's resurrected. This is not a ghost. And yet, something about his physical body is also able to appear through locked doors in one of the stories, which is kind of amazing. He's not recognized by those disciples on the road to Emmaus, as we talked about before. So there's something kind of different about that. So I think the hope that we have is what God has done in Jesus is actually our hope for the entire world, that is restored and it is fully made new. So that means, and the Christian confession has always believed, we believe in the future resurrection of the dead, so that we will all be raised in a kind of a physical, real way. So that's something that I think a lot of people, they have embraced the doctrine of the resurrection, and they've gone, I believe Jesus rose from the dead, but they don't actually see that, okay, that changes then how I view the physical world. It changes how I see my neighbor, and then it changes what my hope is, that all things will be restored. I mean, if I can even be candid here,
Please.
in the United States, this plays into our political and cultural debates as well. Because if my theology is the physical world doesn't matter, then it also means I won't care for creation. It means that oftentimes when I am working with the poor and the oppressed in society, I try to get them to say a prayer, but I don't really think about their tangible needs as having a kind of a real long and lasting impact. But if I believe actually God cares about the physical world, that new creation is beginning to spring up because of the resurrection, then that changes how I care for the poor. And I go, actually, their physical, tangible needs matter. And what if I lived resurrection in their life by bringing about new creation in how I help and serve and care? Again, I said the word bring about, and that's probably not helpful because it's Christ who brings it about. But we get to participate in those places where we find him at work. So I think there's all kinds of implications for our real lives. And that, I think, blows a lot of people's minds, because one of the things I write about in the book is most of us are familiar with Easter. I think both in the US and the UK, both of us are pretty familiar with this celebration of Easter, whether we believed in all the physical stuff or not. Where I am in the southern United States, a lot of people go to church on Easter. Even if they don't go throughout the year, they show up at church on Easter. It might be the one time a year that they actually show up. But when they're there, they often might sit there and go, I believe in the resurrection. Sure. Yeah. Check it off the list. But what if belief in the resurrection is supposed to change everything? What if it has those broad implications for all of us? And that's where I'm trying to kind of encourage people and push people a little bit, is it might change who we are, our outlook, our perspectives, our habits, everything that we do, if resurrection gets to the core of who we are.
You said you would go a bit deeper. Let's go a bit deeper then.
Okay.
Go for it. Take it further on that thought.
All right. Well, let me talk for a minute then about doubt, because I think one of the things in my, I'm 41 years old, so I'm not old, not young. I'm in that weird place. Later on in my ministry, one of the things that I think we're growing in the most is, what do we do with doubt? What do we do with questions? And I think especially when things like the resurrection come up, sometimes we get our guard up, and that's where we think either I believe in it or I don't believe in it. And we, really feel like standing in that middle ground feels really uncomfortable, really difficult for us. But I think about the story of Thomas when he's gathered with a group of disciples. And Jesus appears. It's really funny how John tells that story, because Jesus appears to the disciples. He says, peace be with you. He empowers them, breathes the Holy Spirit on them, which that in and of itself is kind of trippy, kind of interesting. And then he says that they should forgive sins. Well, then if you notice, Thomas isn't there with them the first time. So he does it again. He does the whole thing again for Thomas's sake. And he says, unless I see the scars and the hands. Well, we have historically disparaged Thomas. We've called him doubting Thomas.
Yeah, that's wrong.
Exactly.
He speaks my language. Sorry to interrupt, but
yes.
I'm going to fly the flag for Thomas here. If I'd been there, I would have worded it maybe a bit more diplomatically, or maybe not even said it, but I was certainly gone around having a look. Hold on, just hold your hands up a minute.
Yes.
Just to find out.
Yeah.
He's not doubting. I don't think so. But something happened to Thomas. Yeah. Off you go, sir. I've interrupted enough. Off you go.
No, I'm glad for your interruptions. That's helpful. I think he asked questions of, I want to see it. I want to know it. I want this to be real and substantial. And I think that's totally appropriate. I think that's what a lot of us do. And then if you notice at the end of it, two things that are significant happen. First of all, Thomas makes the biggest statement about Jesus that anybody in the Gospels makes when he says, my Lord and my God. So you're my Lord. That's a very British word that we don't usually use a whole lot here in the United States. But the word Lord is all throughout the New Testament, right? Mm-hmm. My Lord, and he's over everything. And then my God. And calling Jesus God is something we believe. It's something we affirm. But it's something that is not all over the Gospels. It's not really until the end that we see that really revealed. So Thomas has what we call, it's a deep theological term, but the highest Christological statement in the New Testament. And then he says, my Lord and my God. The other thing that happens is Jesus says, blessed are you that you see and believe. But then he said, and blessed are those who do not see and still believe. So there is this hope for us too, and many of us in times of uncertainty and doubt. I tell people that faith is an important word because faith and certainty are not the same thing. In fact, faith and certainty are different from one another. Certainty, you don't have to have faith. If you're certain of something, you don't have to have faith. Faith is a leap. It's a trust. I have many people in my congregation, many people in my life who go, I've not figured this whole thing out yet. There's still a lot of stuff I don't understand, but I'm choosing to live into this story. I'm choosing to lean in and to listen. And I think that's faith. And I think that's a blessing that is on us for that.
For those people in church that want to ask questions, why can't they? So why is the church, I think, or why have Christians lost the adaptation, lost the understanding that it's cool to ask questions and say, I don't know? Because for me personally, I'm getting on a bit of a rant here. I know full well now that I would not be here today if it wasn't for the people in my church growing up. I wasn't even a Christian who looked at me and was probably saying, well, he's a rough diamond in the making there. He's not even a diamond yet. But there's something about it. We'll just play along. We'll just encourage him. We'll answer questions. Why is it that people today, do you think, can't answer the questions or don't want to answer the questions and it's become more authoritative? Or maybe it's not. Tell me more.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. That has been something I've been drawn to my whole ministry is questions. In fact, it's really funny that you phrased it that way because I was on a pastoral staff for a while. And my dad, who was the senior pastor for a while, and then there were other pastors, would often go, hey, I want you to meet with such and such. And I go, okay, cool, I'd love to. And they go, because he has a lot of questions. And so the idea was kind of sitting with people in those questions. I think it's incredibly important because when you ask questions, you're saying this thing really matters.
Exactly.
It's important. It has value to me. And so I want to ask this. And then the other thing is God can handle our questions. We don't have to believe that this is somehow going to shake God. I think the reason why a lot of preachers get insecure in questions is they realize this might shake my ministry.
Yeah.
This might change me. There's some anxiety, there's some concern. A lot of us preachers we spend a lot of our time studying and researching. And so in their defense, there also is this concern of like, okay, what if I don't have a good answer, that I can't do this? And that's where we as pastors and leaders, we have to trust the Holy Spirit. If people come and ask questions with me, I'll say, well, here's what I think the Christian tradition says about that. Here's what my thoughts are and, what I'm batting around. But at the end of the day, I might have to say, hey, I may not have the best answer for you. And that's where I have to trust the Holy Spirit's working in their life in ways that is beyond my capacity.
Yeah.
And so I think some of the challenges, we want to fix people. We want to make it all better. We want to have the perfect answers for everything. But the faith is inherently about trust and risk and relationship and all those things that are not certainty.
Can I take it one step further on this? The reason why pastors don't want to answer the question is because they're looking for your check, your credit card statement, whatever, every week or every month to keep funding the ministry. So they don't want to rock the boat. Would that be fair or unfair to say?
Yeah, I think it's fair for some, for sure. I think there are a lot of pastors out there that are ethically strong, are caring, compassionate. They genuinely do want that. But you're right, that exists out there. And it's a great challenge. That's one of the joys of having a very small church like mine. We all kind of just give what we can and we participate in this. And so there's not quite the same, pressure on big donors or different things like that. But yeah, I definitely think that would be the darker side of what you're talking about for sure. Again, I think there's a lot of pastors out there, though, that really do have good hearts. They just have believed this myth that they have to be the final authority and the answer man, and they have to have the fix.
Yeah.
I remember when I was an associate pastor, there was one Sunday that my dad asked me to preach, and we were just starting to follow the lectionary, and it was Trinity Sunday, okay? And I felt as an associate pastor that my job that next Sunday morning was to explain the Trinity to the congregation. And I remember just being in sweats and being panicky and just so nervous about how am I going to explain the Trinity to all of them? As I've gotten older in ministry, I've realized our job on Trinity Sunday is not to explain the Trinity. Our job is to try to celebrate and talk about its beauty. And that's kind of the beginning. And then, as we have questions, we unpack that. But when we put it all on us, where we have to be the ultimate fix, we get afraid of people's questions. We get nervous about it.
Please tell me that when you do Trinity Sunday, you then sing Holy, 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 which was written for Trinity Sunday. Please.
Yes, for sure.
Otherwise, I would have walked out. I would have been Mr. Angry. Excuse me, you're not a real pastor. Sorry.
That's great. I love it.
Actually, for those listening that I think, well, maybe I should ask more questions. Here's a little thought you could have. Set a time aside to have questions, but hand out donuts at the same time. So they're chewing on the donuts so they can't ask a question. And you've made it available.
Oh my gosh, that's so great. That's so great. We do a confirmation class here, and we take people through confirmation. And that's one of the times, this last confirmation class I had especially, I had a lot of people with some really challenging questions.
Yeah.
I mean, they were just really difficult and really pointed. And I rejoice in that. I celebrate that. And then at the end of one of them, I remember I kind of went, hey, that's the best I can do. But, I don't know exactly the full answer to that question. And I remember she told me later, she came back and she said, my favorite part of the whole class was when you were willing to admit you don't know something.
Wow.
Because there's just so many people that are unwilling to say that.
Yeah.
But again, so much of our faith is humility. I think it's important.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's carry on a bit further if that's okay. And I'm going to put you on the spot.
Please.
Imagine I am Mr. Angry and I've come along reluctantly on it's Sunday morning and it's Easter Sunday and I'm there against my will. I'm only doing it for my wife, girlfriend, just there reluctantly.
Yeah.
You've handed out the donuts.
Yeah.
And you then say, has anyone got a question? And I put my hand up and I say, yes, I don't believe in what you're saying. It's rubbish about the resurrection. So come on then. Have a go at me. What would you say?
So more than I receive that, God loves you and bless you.
Yeah, I don't want that made me even more angry.
To be honest with you, Martin, if somebody just says, I don't believe in the resurrection and they're hostile about it, nothing I'm going to say is really going to help at that point. Maybe there's certain personalities that would just engage with kind of a fight in that way. But for me, the hope is, hey, I hear you. And I'm glad that you came today. Thanks. It shows that you love your wife and that you are here with her. And I know that this was a challenge for you. And so we hope that there's some opportunities for conversation in the future. And then if there's particular questions that he might have about that, we could talk about that. I think, I'll take a little bit further here.
Please.
One of the reasons people say they don't believe in the resurrection is just because physically this doesn't make sense to them. I mean, the laws of nature, laws of, biology, all those kind of things. It makes a lot more sense to a lot of people to think somebody made up this story or ancient people who didn't have the same scientific rationale as we did, would make up the story. And the only thing I just point to people in that is the universe is actually quite a bit more dynamic than we often think of it. Even scientists and physicists will tell us there's all kinds of things that happen that we can't explain. We don't really know the reasons for it. There are new things that pop up, every day that they go, oh, this is curious. This is an interesting kind of thing. And so resurrection from the dead, it's right. I mean, it's exactly right that historically we have never seen anything like that happen. There's no, documented, well, I guess there's some stories out there, but ultimately, if you look at that and you go, scientists would say this kind of thing doesn't happen. And that's using this technique of, in science, they'll often, instead of saying this can't happen, they'll say, we have never seen the proof of this to happen. And so it leaves some room and some opportunity for something that we can't explain. You have to do that with the resurrection, with belief in the resurrection. You have to be able to say God and the universe, things are happening that we can't fully explain. And this is a story based on the witnesses that we have, the stories that have been passed down from generation to generation, that we say something happened there that has changed the course of history. Something happened that the apostles would give their lives for. Now, if you get to that point and you go, I just can't go further yet, then that's where I go, that's fine. It's okay. I have people in my church that they have certain thoughts about, they might have certain doubts about the resurrection or about the virgin birth. And yet they come and they confess the creed and they say, this is a story. And when I look at all the different stories of the world, this is the story that I want to believe in and I want to trust in and I want to have faith in. And so I tell people, go ahead and keep confessing that creed because there is something about that begins to shape us in that direction. But yeah, I just don't think ever strong-arming people or trying to debate people into this is really ever helpful. I think it's got to be they see it lived out in everyday life.
Well, on behalf of all those Mr. Angries that might ever turn up in your church, you didn't meet me with anger, which actually is a very important thing. That rule 1, don't confront and just be honest. I love that. In closing, before we get to the final question, which obviously we do on every podcast, and that is, who is your Christian hero? This Easter, if we want to make it different from any other Easter, maybe just in the way we think or what we do, what would you like to say on that?
A few things. First of all, I would say celebrate fully. In your doubt, in confusion you might have, in questions, let yourself really celebrate Easter. Throw a big party for Easter. In our society, we throw parties for Christmas. We have lots of stuff around the holiday season that we describe. But Easter is really the central feast of the church calendar. And I think we ought to have way more parties than we do. So throw a party not just for Easter Sunday, but the season of Easter is actually 50 days long. And that really should be a season of celebration, of party. I love how N.T. Wright says it. He says, you should have a champagne before morning prayer on Easter. And I just thought that's great. But like, just celebrating Easter, because we are an Easter people and a resurrection people. I think there is something that may sound nice. Yeah, okay, celebrate it. There is something about what we celebrate and how we intentionally celebrate that I do think begins to shape us and change us. Paul in the New Testament, when he says, rejoice in the Lord always, again, I say rejoice. He's not saying feel happy. He's not saying, hey, you need to feel happy about this. He's saying do a public celebration, throw a party for this. And I think that's really what we're called to do in Easter, is have a celebration. Again, if you're doubting, if you're struggling, if you're not sure if you believe in all this, still, celebrate this time during Easter. And then the other thing I'd say is allow Easter to begin to ask, okay, what would it mean if I was actually didn't just believe in resurrection, but what would it happen if this story of the God who took on human flesh, died, but then rose again, how would that change me? And really sit with those questions. What would it mean for me to be a people of resurrection? We have all these myths in a good way in our society about things being right, things being restored, being a community that lives fully as we're supposed to be. I think about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community. He describes this community that is really living this full and whole and diverse life together, where there's not need, there is hope and healing and restoration and all of that. And then I think about even like John Lennon's, Imagine song.
Sorry, I'm a great John Lennon fan. Can't stand that song.
Yes, well, a lot of people can't, and I get it.
Digressing here. Give me Mind Games any day, not Imagine. But anyway, carry on.
Well, he's painting the picture of a utopian world, a world where everything is right. People have poked holes at that because they go, okay, well, yeah, of course that sounds great, but it sounds a little superficial. But that longing and that hope is for the world made right.
Yeah.
What would it look like if resurrection meant we live that way in our everyday life now? Like with my people in my household, or with my neighborhood, or with the people at work. Like, what would that actually look like? It's going to look different for everybody, But that's where I would say, if you celebrate Easter this year, don't just go on with the rest of your life as normal. Begin to take that 50 days and really live into it, and then ask yourself, what would it mean for me to actually be part of the resurrection people?
See, that's a brilliant answer. And actually, I'm going to tell you something now that you most probably know anyway. But I did mention that you went to Oral Roberts University. Did you know that John Lennon was in conversation with Oral Roberts through what we now know as, well, we call letters, but obviously if you'd had an email in those days, it would have been email. Were you aware of that?
Yes, I was. They've got the letters at the library there.
Oh, have they?
And yeah, it's pretty amazing the early conversations when Oral Roberts was on TV.
Yeah.
And he was in relationship with Johnny Cash. He had Elvis Presley on his show. I mean, some of those early days were really pretty amazing. I think about our world now and how polarized everything is, and some of the challenges with that and how difficult that might be. But it was a beautiful thing. I think John Lennon, you never know where those questions ended up, but I know he sure had a lot of questions.
But my understanding is, because there was another televangelist that he wrote to, so it was Oral Roberts and somebody else.
Yeah.
Pat Robertson? I think it was Pat Robertson.
Okay.
And they did what you've been saying, whereby instead of writing back to John Lennon, look, go and stuff it, mate, go and write another song, we don't want to talk to you, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They conversed with him. They kept conversing and conversing and conversing.
Yeah.
I have no doubt from the book that I've read about John Lennon, I am pretty sure he became a Christian.
Wow.
It's what happened after that.
Sure.
Which just proves that Oral Roberts took time. Pat Robertson took time. Despite what you might think of them and everything else,
That's right.
they took time to write and answer questions and start building a relationship.
Yeah, that's right.
Character building, yeah.
If I could say a pastoral word really quick,
Please.
I just feel like there's also this dilemma for those, and when we talk about the resurrection, it often comes up, for those who have been Christians, they've had a conversion experience, maybe they've been baptized, maybe they were raised in the faith, and then they begin to have questions in such a way that they fall away from their faith. It's a phenomenon we're calling today deconstruction, which we could talk about how that may not be the best term for it. But anyway, the deconstruction of their faith. One of the things that I just encourage people in is as you ask questions, as you explore, it's okay to also go, but I do remember that I have this identity. This thing has happened in me. I've been changed. I am in all kinds of places of my belief and thoughts right now. I don't know where it all is, but to have kind of that anchor point, we call it our baptismal identity, that you have that thing that you're rooted in. And at some point you may say, I want to reject that and I want to move away from that. And it's fine. But it's okay as you explore and as you ask questions to kind of let that be your anchor point. Okay, I know I still am part of the family of God. I know this is who I am. That's what I'd hope in a John Lennon situation, if he went in all kinds of different directions and all kinds of things, would be to say, oh, but remember back then what God did in you? And kind of let that be an anchor point.
Yeah. For those who want to know a bit more then, there's a fantastic book that came out 20 years ago called The Gospel According to the Beatles. And it was written by an English bloke. I've forgotten who wrote it, but it's an absolute belter of a book and does explain a bit of what I'm talking about. And that's where I got the information from. But it's called The Gospel According to the Beatles.
Nice. That's awesome.
Right. We mentioned Thomas, and I was flying the flag for Thomas earlier on. But people forget that something must have happened to Thomas. Yeah. And you did allude to this because Thomas ended up in India. This is the thing. So there he was 1 minute in what we now know as Jerusalem. The next minute, he's somehow getting on an EasyJet flight, flying over the Himalayas and ending in India. Or maybe he had to go the old-fashioned way of camels. Whatever happened, he got to India.
Yeah. Right.
Now, would you do that for a lie? What do you think? Come on, share it all, please.
Oh my gosh. And that's the greatest witness that we have is the disciples and what ended up happening in their lives is the ways that they lived this out, the way that they went into new communities and began to spread this. I mean, part of the book that I'm writing, it's the resurrection stories is part of it, but it's also the book of Acts and the emerging of the new church. Because if the resurrections happened, everything has changed. And we have a new community that's breaking boundaries by the Holy Spirit and going into all these new places. And so I think that's definitely true with Thomas. And then it's true of the martyrdom of so many of the disciples. We don't know all their stories specifically, but we definitely know that many of them were martyred for their faith. And so when we look at that and we go, okay, if you were just making something up for fame or for a buck or something like that, you get the end of your story. I mean, that is quite powerful. And that's where even a lot of scholars who are deep skeptics of this have to kind of go, they end up saying something like they were deluded or they had mass hysteria or something like that because their lives were so fundamentally changed. And that's where I have to go, we have to imagine what that would mean for us today. If we really believe in resurrection, how might that change us? Now, it might not lead us to martyrdom, but it would lead us in such a way that we're giving of our lives in a very open-handed kind of way that because we have a radical trust in something beyond ourselves.
Thank you. So this Easter time then, if you could just choose one chorus or one hymn that you would like every church to sing on Easter Sunday, what would you like us to listen to so that we can devour the words and think, oh, no, I get that now?
Okay, so there's a song. This is going to be super cheesy for a lot of people, okay? So some of this is nostalgia. Keith Green.
We've heard of him.
He was a singer.
He was.
He writes this song. It might even be called the Easter song. I'm not sure, but it's hear the bells ringing, they're singing, Christ Jesus is... No, you can be born again. He has risen from the dead. That's what it is. And I remember my dad singing that every Easter Sunday morning. He would turn it on. We'd listen to it. It was such an important thing. And I like that it starts with hear the bells ringing because this is celebration. Something has changed. Keith Green went in all different kinds of directions in his life. I'm not like affirming every single thing that he ever said, but that song is so beautiful. And if you could start your Easter Sunday morning with that song, it puts you in this frame of mind of something has changed. So I love it.
And the song is called again, please?
I think it's called the Easter Song. Let me look it up.
And whilst you're looking it up, I love the idea then that if it starts about the bells ringing, you want to have a party, you want to have a celebration.
Yes.
And of course, you don't have to have champagne beforehand, like NT Wright said, because
Sure.
it's slightly more expensive. You can have Prosecco, you can have a Cava.
That's right. Yes, exactly. It's just called Easter Song by Keith Green. Hear the bells ringing, they're singing that we can be born again. Hear the bells ringing, they're singing Christ is risen from the dead. And then the chorus is joy to the world. He is risen. Alleluia. He is risen. Alleluia. He's risen. Alleluia. Alleluia. It's simple. It's not deep theology, but that's part of what I've been trying to say, Martin, is I think the theological questions are really important. They really matter. I think doctrinal questions are important. But I actually think what we do with our celebrations, with our bodies, how we participate, it has a way of shaping us that goes along with the doctrine. It forms us in a really deep way. Augustine talked about the shaping of our loves, what we love and where that's pointed towards. And I think the celebration has a way of doing that.
Well, I'm looking forward to you coming back in however many months, years' time, whenever, that the book can be released.
Yes, for sure.
I know you've just sent it off to the publishing house, the editor. So how many rewrites? Who knows? It might not need a rewrite. But what's the earliest time frame we're going to get for seeing this book, do you think?
Yeah, so the hope is obviously get it well before Easter. The hope is about March. Maybe I can get it earlier, but sometime in March. And if people want to stay connected with that, my Substack, the Art of Preaching Substack, I produce updates on that pretty regularly, and they can check that out.
Give us a proper plug then before we get to the final question of who your Christian hero is. If they want to get in contact with you as well on what you've shared, or maybe they want to learn more about your podcast, what can they do to get hold of you, please, Preston?
Yeah, so the website is theartofpreaching.substack.com, theartofpreaching.substack.com. I am on all the social medias, Preston Sharpe, except Sharpe has an E at the end of it, so you have to remember that. I'm on, all the social media sites. You can keep up with me there. I'd love to connect with you. And then also I pastor a great community in Nashville. So if you're ever over here in Nashville and you want to hang out, or my sermons are on there too, if you want to check that out, that's www.sacramentchurch.com.
Well, it's been a podcast and a half. I didn't know we were going to end up like this, but I just have to ask you one final question. And that is, Preston Sharpe with an E.
Yes.
Who is your Christian hero, please?
The one that I really looked up to as a kid, and a lot of his speaking and his writing, is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he has been just an influential voice. And I'd want to ask, if I could ever, what he thinks of our society and our world today, what lens he would view that through. And so there's so much about his vision, his dream of the beloved community, some of the struggles that he faced, and yet he did it from a Christian center, a Christian identity and core. And so I'd want to ask those same kind of questions. What does that look like for us today?
He's one of my heroes, I have to say. For those that don't really know much about him and they've heard his name, give us a quick 2-minute biography of who Martin Luther King was, please. Influential
Baptist preacher from the South who spoke into a lot of the racial issues surrounding segregation that we had in the United States. Of course, that's the great original sin of our country, is not only slavery, but then our, the Jim Crow South and all of the laws of segregation that we had in place for so long. He really spoke for equality for all people, and then also gave a vision of unity and diversity. In addition, those are the things that when people quote Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., they often quote some of those things, which is really important and really good. But also he spoke out against wars. He spoke out against economic inequality, about some things that really ruffled a lot of feathers. And then he was fatally shot for his views. That came at a time where he actually had a pretty low approval rating at that point, because he had spoken such a prophetic critique of the culture that a lot of people were really struggling with what he had to say, and he was killed. So as we look back on his life and we look back on his words, they become for us today this kind of vision for us of, man, we have come a long way in some ways, but then in other ways, we have a long way to go and not gotten close to really his ultimate dream. In fact, when I was in 5th grade, I memorized his I Have a Dream speech.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And my pastor at the time, I was part of a mega church, and he asked me every year for a series of years to give the speech in front of the congregation on the Sunday right before Martin Luther King Day. And so I did that for a period of time. Now I look back on it and I go, I don't know if the little blonde-headed white boy was the right one to say that.
Well, I don't know.
But it was deeply formative for me and meaningful in my life.
Am I right in saying that he had said that dream speech before in other churches, and that's when he was at the monument, wasn't it? Where
Yes.
it's then recorded.
Yes.
Wasn't it Mahalia Jackson, the fantastic gospel
That's right.
singer, says, "Here, Martin," obviously not quite like that. Why don't you tell the
Yes.
dream speech?
Yeah. Tell him about the dream, Martin. Yeah, he was giving the speech as he had written it in his notes. He had a manuscript in front of him. It just wasn't, for some reason, they felt like he just wasn't really connecting with people. And so Mahalia Jackson says, tell him about the dream, Martin. And I guess she can even be heard in some of the recordings saying that.
Oh, wow.
And then he shifts completely and basically begins preaching. He begins sharing the dream of a world made right. And if we look at that, it lines up so well with the prophets, particularly the prophet Isaiah, of a dream of a world restored. There's some stuff that's unique to the United States in what he says, but the prophetic impulse is definitely there. And you can definitely tell it's the Christian center that comes from it.
Out of all that speech, because it's a couple of minutes long, which is the bit that chokes you up the most?
I would say when he says, I have a dream that one day the sons of the former slaves and the sons of the former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day my 4 little children will grow up in a nation where they're not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And then he says, I have a dream where we will hew out the mountain of despair to a stone of hope, where we will transform the jangling discords of this country into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. I think that part about the symphony of brotherhood really strikes me because he's talking about a song that we're singing. He's talking about a world that is a whole new narrative, a whole new story than what's been told before. And then I think even, to dovetail with what we're talking about resurrection, the idea that we take a mountain of despair, what we see as the crucifixion, the death and self-giving and the humiliation of the cross. And what resurrection does is a stone of hope, that there's something new and lasting. That part just really, really gets me. I think as a dad, when he talks about his children, there's a moment where you think about the schools that were desegregated or were segregated for so long, and the pain that the violent reaction to desegregation that happened. I don't know. It's a powerful moment in history. Of course, I wasn't alive when that happened, when he gave that speech. But I look back and just really inspired by those words.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
An incredible man. And he was prepared to stand up and be counted as well. Phenomenal.
Yes.
I have said a couple of times now in this podcast, I'm going to make this my Easter podcast. Considering we're recording this in January, I'm going to withhold it for a few months, hoping now that people are listening to this through the Easter holidays, you'll want to go and have a party because Preston said. So if Preston says you can have a party, then have a party for goodness sake. And if Martin Luther King is inspiring you from what you just heard, read up a bit more about him. A couple of classic films, one with David Oyelowo, who plays Martin Luther King. Absolutely phenomenal about what goes on there.
That's
so
right.
I wish everybody a really happy Easter. I hope you've been challenged, but also really encouraged like I have just been listening to this. Preston, thank you so much for your time, sir. Please keep going, and I'd love to have you back in the not near distant future. We'll talk about something else, if that's all right.
Yes, totally. Anything. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant. Cheers.
Thank you, Martin.
God bless.
I'm glad to be here.
And happy Easter.
Yes.
And if you haven't already hit the like and subscribe button, please do. Thank you. Next time on Off-Grid Christianity, it's a special mini podcast for this Easter holiday.
But we tend as Christians sometimes to go straight from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday, and then we miss so much of the richness of all that happened in between. And just as Psalm 23 is this extraordinary journey through many different pastures, through many different seasons, because the psalm is very much in different seasons. So all of those, in a sense, are represented during that last week of Jesus' life. And at our peril, we jump from Palm Sunday to Easter Sunday. So I hope that people will engage a little bit more, both with the psalm, but also with the richness of all the different elements of Jesus' last week, which mirror the different elements of our own lives, moments of celebration, moments of confusion for those around Jesus who didn't understand his teaching, moments of rest and friendship, moments of betrayal, and ultimately for us all, of course, death will come. But knowing that Jesus has gone through that to resurrection puts a whole different kind of colour, a whole different perspective for us when we look at our own mortality. hugely rich and so often missed.
So please join me next week for this mini podcast as we reflect as to what Easter means by way of Psalm 23 and all the imagery the verses contain, with our special guest, a returning guest, Jeannie Kendall, the author of a brand new book on Psalm 23. Until then, cheerio.